All right, we're recording. I think this is episode 29 already. We're going to be starting on page 45 of Just This by Richard Rohr, Undergoing God. And for all those of you who are watching the recordings, if you would like to join us live, you're most welcome to do that. And everything that you need, all the links and all the information you'll find in the comments right underneath the window. So feel free to join us if you would like. All right, for the rest of us, is there anything that was hanging on from neither clinging nor opposing from last week that we did that you would like to revisit, clarify, dig in a little more before we get some new stuff going? Okay, looks like we're clear and ready for takeoff. Yeah? All right, here we go. Undergoing God. This is to me, this is going an interesting section. Let's see what you all think about it. He's been kind of on in the last few segments really talking about becoming aware of what it is that are our preferences and aversions. Trying to become more aware of that because those are the things that are going to skew us and color us and take us off to the races, trigger us, do all sorts of things. And that in true contemplative fashion, we shouldn't be clinging or opposing. You know, it's kind of like that story that I'm always telling about the young monk who wants to get closer to God and he's sent to the cemetery to insult the dead and then to praise the dead. And the moral of that story is when you can react to the praises and insults of men the way the dead do, then you'll get closer to God. Same idea here. You know, can we let go of all of that stuff and be able to find that path down the middle? So he's been on that tack for the last few little segments here. And now we're going to go with this undergoing God idea. So starting right there on page 45, your life is not about you. You are about life. You are an instance of a universal and even eternal pattern. The one life that many of us call God is living itself in you and through you and as you. This realization is an earthquake in the brain, a hurricane in the heart, a Copernican revolution in the mind, and a monumental shift in consciousness. Yet most of us do not seem interested in it. It is too big to imagine and can only be revealed slowly. You have never been separate from God except in your mind. You gradually recognize that the myriad forms of life in the universe are completely diverse and utterly one at the same time. Just like the Trinity, which might be called diversity in perfect love with itself. The Trinity might be called diversity in perfect love with itself, which creates oneness. We are all undergoing God, whose supreme job is the oneing of all reality. Oneing is a lovely word I borrow from Lady Julian of Norwich's Middle English to describe the process of overcoming dualisms and divisions artificially created by the ego and the mind. This should be an enormous weight off your back. All you can really do is agree to joyously participate. Life in the spirit will feel like being caught much more than being taught about any particular doctrine. Henceforth, your very motivation and momentum for the journey toward holiness and wholeness is simply immense gratitude for already being there. So he's touching on some themes that we've been hammering on for years now, but it's a good condensation of them. Any initial reactions? Anything stand out at you before we go back? So there is some big concepts here. I mean, he calls it an earthquake in the brain and a hurricane in the heart and a Copernican revolution in the mind. And there are some big concepts here. And I want to take some time to see if we can develop them a bit because when you read something like this, it's so easy to just kind of speed past it, you know, on the freeway at 70 miles an hour, and we don't really have the time to assimilate it enough to realize what a big shift this is. So when he says your life is not about you, you are about life. You are an instance of a universal and even eternal pattern. The one life that many of us call God is living itself in you and through you and as you. We live, this is going to be especially hard for us as modern Westerners, because Western culture, starting with the Greeks, is built on individualism. And this country was certainly built on individualism. And Americans in general are probably the most individualistic society on the face of the earth. You know, when we will move heaven and earth to save one child out of who fell into a well, you know, and do the things that we do, you know, other countries are kind of shaking their heads. I mean, come on, you know, where's the cost benefit analysis in that? But the truth of the matter, in an individualist society, we believe that the society, the community, the collective exists to protect the rights of the individual. I mean, that's sort of enshrined in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, right? But in a collectivist or communal culture, the individual exists to serve the community. The individual's identity is primarily with the community, not with the individual. And ancient cultures were absolutely collectivist and communal. And so this is something, and this is the culture that wrote our scriptures. So we need to realize that the authors of our scriptures, their mindset, their worldview, their understanding is as a collective primarily. And also epic. We talk about epic a lot: experiential, participatory, image-based, and communal. And so it's coming from such a different framework. And then we read the words, but we're processing them through our own individual understanding of the world, individualistic understanding of the world, and through the opposite of epic. So automatically, I don't know if you've ever, as a counselor, when I'm counseling a couple, you know, I'm literally watching the words change meaning in the air between one person's lips and the other person's ears. I mean, there is just, the frame of reference is so different. The same words are meaning something completely different. And you watch that, and you may have, even if you're not a counselor, you may have seen that happen. This is exactly what's happening when we read the scriptures and we're trying to understand something that's coming from such an alien frame of reference. And so I wanted to spend some time here. And what I want to do is I want to read you about 2.5 pages from my book, The Fifth Way. And it's about the Moken culture. And let's see if this starts to bring this concept home a little better for us. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is it large enough? I made it big for you all. Hopefully you can see it. So this is where this is on a section trying to get our arms around this concept of kingdom, which is the main structural element of Jesus' teaching. If you don't understand kingdom, you're never going to understand Jesus. And so I spent a lot of time on that. So this idea, part of what kingdom is all about is unity and here-nowness. It's all about the oneness of things, and it's about the immediacy of things. If we don't get that about kingdom, if we're putting it out into heaven of the next life or anything else, then we're not going to understand Jesus. So here's the section. When the tsunamis barreled over the land encircling the Indian Ocean on the day after Christmas 2004, killing hundreds of thousands of people, it had all begun with an earthquake under the Andaman Sea, the body of water between the coast of Burma and Thailand and the string of islands extending north of Sumatra. But living there at Ocean Zero, the island-dotted Andaman Sea, for hundreds or maybe thousands of years was a people who didn't lose a single person to the tsunamis. A people so intimately connected with the sea that they read the signs and ran for higher ground or paddled to deeper water before the waves struck. These sea nomads, who call themselves the Moken, and who are called sea gypsies by others, spend as many as 7 to 8 months a year on the water and have become truly amphibious. Their children learn to swim before they can walk. And compared to us, they can see twice as clearly underwater and actually lower their heart rates at will in order to dive deeper and stay underwater twice as long. They are among the peoples of the earth least touched by modern civilization. As they came into the media focus in the wake of the tsunamis, because of their ability to read the ocean and survive the disaster, it was their culture and worldview that delivered the greatest shocks. The Moken people have no words in their language or concepts in their worldview for want, when, hello, or goodbye, among others. And this is not an isolated phenomenon, as the Moken are not alone in this. Other Indonesian tribes also have similar missing concepts in their languages. The Apayo tribe in the Philippines, who have no words for hello or goodbye either, also have no word for thank you. Stop for a moment and try to conceive of daily life without words or even the notion of want, when, hello, goodbye, or thank you. Each Moken has no idea how old he or she is. There are no birthdays or birthday parties. Without a concept of when, there is no concept of past or future at all. No sense of the passage of time. Just the endless alternation of day and night, the unchanging sea, and an eternal present moment. There's no recalling and recounting of days past or planning, anticipating future events. When someone leaves, there's no sadness, no tender hugs goodbye. That person is simply not present anymore. And when a person returns, even after a long absence, there's no joy at the reunion, no celebration or words of greeting. He or she is simply present again, moving seamlessly in and out of the shared moment. There are no tears at departure or shouts and smiles at return, because there is no sense of disconnection or separation at all. As if physical presence is an unimportant detail, one that has no bearing at all on true connection and unity. Not having words for want or thank you also means there's no conception of personal ownership. There are no words for giving or taking, my or mine. Everything is shared and owned by all, so there's never a need to express gratitude for things freely exchanged as needed. Never an impulse to gather or amass anything. No sense of lack, no feelings of envy, greed, or miserliness. These are a people who are so connected, so symbiotic, so reliant on each other and nature for their very existence and survival, as to be more like one organism with many moving parts than individual people with separate and competing agendas trying to live and work together. How does a single organism sense separation from itself? How does it feel gratitude toward itself or desire to withhold anything from itself? Such concepts don't exist. And so the need to have words in their agreement to express them doesn't exist either. Now, we can express admiration for these people, saying that they exhibit qualities that we should emulate, that they occupy a higher moral ground than the rest of us civilized types. But that's not only untrue, it misses the point entirely. When I was discussing the Moken with a study group one night, a woman sat there just shaking her head. And when I asked her what she was thinking, she said she couldn't imagine not celebrating her daughter's birthday, feeling sadness at her departure, and wanting to run and hold her on her return. Other heads started nodding in agreement, because to her and to us, love is experienced and expressed through remembrance of the past and anticipation of the future, through the sense of loss during separation. To us, the lack of these emotions and notions among the Moken can make them seem somehow less human, less able to express the full range of human interaction, more animal-like, or at least immature, childlike in their dealings with each other and ability to love fully. That's how it is with a clash of worldviews. We attach moral valences, good and bad, to activities and attitudes within our own worldviews and cultures. But how can those labels possibly apply to other cultures and worldviews? There are certainly both good and bad Moken people, but their goodness or badness or ability to express full humanity is not measured by our standards of generosity or greed or expression of joy at a person's return. They have their own measures that would also possibly be just as otherworldly to our sensibilities. On the other hand, the culture of a people like the Moken is tied to a time in our past when the pressing needs of survival, of living a subsistence life in a difficult environment required the kind of communal and collective cooperation that would ensure the continuation of the group. When the needs of the individual were only important to the degree that they served the needs of all others in the group. The technologies and abundance of our civilization mask the underlying need for such cooperation and communal connection between us as individuals, but that doesn't mean that the need has ceased to exist. When I ran across this, it so struck me at the time that I was working on the book because it illustrated what I see as the essence of where our scriptures come from, the essence of this oneness that is feeling. And it's also underscoring the contemplative experience that the more we move into contemplative practice, the more we are becoming aware of this oneness of everything. And just like this idea from the Moken, that they are more like parts of a single organism rather than individuals trying to work cooperatively, I think is exactly what Rohr is pointing at. Your life is not about you, you are about life. We are parts of life, parts of this larger organism of life. And when we are clearing out our minds and stepping away from our minds, which are the only things that tell us that we're separated, we can start to sense that again. We can start to feel that again and feel our connectedness to each other. And so I'm hoping that that gives you a little look into the kind of oneness and connection we're talking about, the kind of communal expression and I suppose reality that we have lost here in the West, starting with the Greeks, who are all about individualism as well. But that is still there, just under the surface, and it's still pertinent to us. And our goal as contemplatives is to be able to see with that double sight, to deal with the individual form and function, to deal with our culture as it is, because we have to, but at the same time, to be able to see the oneness underneath and see how we still really are, part of this living whole that we call the universe. Okay, any thoughts about that?
God, that was a lot.
I've always thought that it's like really fascinating, the connection between language and the thought of a culture. There's another culture in Brazil. It's like the Awandawa tribe or something. They have no language for time, no temporal concepts or anything like that. And I remember one day doing a little experiment, trying to go through an entire day without using the word I. And it was really hard. I couldn't do it because it's so ingrained in my just mentality, it was really interesting. It was really interesting.
It's interesting that you brought that up, Sarah, because in Jesus' day, there was a saying by the rabbis that any prayer that was not prayed in the name of all Israel was no prayer at all. So think about that. Any prayer that is not prayed in the name of all Israel is no prayer at all. So any prayer starting with I, any prayer talking about me would be no prayer at all to such a communal society as the Jews, because they were all about their nation. They were all about their tribe. They existed to benefit the tribe. And so their prayers were always we and us, not I and me. There's this whole shift that we don't appreciate as we read our English versions of ancient Eastern scripture.
Yeah. And I think that concept too of lacking the connection in the community lends itself to a lot of unnecessary anguish in our culture. We perceive ourselves to be alone when we're not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I hope reading about the Moken is at least giving you some other dimensions to look at when we read these two sentences that open this section. Your life is not about you, you are about life. You are an instance of a universal and even eternal pattern. So we're part of a whole. We're like part of a mosaic. We're part of this whole. You know, our minds can conceive of ourselves as separate and in competition with, and that's the way we live our lives because of that. But going back to Genesis 1 and 2 and the garden, you know, once you've eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, on that day you shall surely die, says the Lord. You know, well, you die to that sense of connection that you had as a child before. You die to that sense of peace. You now know that you're naked. You know that you need to cover up. You know these things. And then, of course, now you're going to have to, you know, win your bread by the sweat of your brow and bear your children in pain. So the realities of life as we know it set in from that point on. But the truth of the matter is that we are all one. We are all this oneness. The Aborigines of Australia have what they call dream time, which is all at once, every when time. You know, that to them is the basic reality of the universe, of all creation. And the ability for us to remember time as a linear construct is the illusion, whereas we in the West believe that linear time is the reality. And all at once, every when is the illusion. We've got the whole thing back to front. But as a contemplative and as a mystic, as you start to experience every when time, this dream time, you realize more and more that it is the reality. It is just this one moment always. You know, the fact that we can remember other circumstances and other moments gives us a sense of linear time. But as that physicist said, if we had no memory, there would be no time. You know, we'd be back to every when all at once. So it's a matter of trying to get our head around possibly other ways of looking at life that are going to comport better with what we're starting to experience as contemplatives.
So I want to make a comment about, because I grew up in a Western society as a child, but I grew up in an Asian family as Chinese, and it's called boundaries. So there's that clash. Meaning, when I'm in the Western culture, was in the Asian, when we were growing up as kids with cousins, everyone can borrow everybody's stuff. You can go to each other's houses. You have keys to each other's houses. Until we are here in the United States, you cannot borrow that. You have to ask my permission. You can come in. You cannot come in. We have keys to each other's houses. That's how it is. Now, with my daughters, that won't happen. There's that possession, whereas the boundaries were blurred, as you see. Even to the point where we borrow, we wear each other's clothes. These are my cousins, sisters. To the point where if you have to, you can borrow each other's underwear. That's how it is. But now, having grown up in the Western side, you cannot do that. That's mine. You
Interesting.
need to ask permission. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's when I'm learning too boundaries. But I think it's a very Western concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Ellen's coming from an Asian culture, and Asians are collectivists and communal in their cultural. Most of the world is, you know, it's the West that's not, and the developed West that's not. And so we're kind of the outlier here, but most cultures are. And when you're in a subsistence society like the Moken, then yeah, you're communal or you're dead. I mean, in ancient Hebrew culture, to be put outside of the community was a death sentence. So if you committed an unclean act and you were excised from the community, you're dead unless you can get back. That's why there was always a way back. You know, once you committed an unclean act, there was a way to get back. You could go to the temple, you could do the prescribed rites and rituals that you needed to do to come back into community, because that was your survival, especially when they were still nomadic. Then Everything is the tribe. Your survival depends on the tribe, and you contribute to the survival of the tribe, or you're not in the tribe anymore. So it's such a different way of looking at life. It's hard for us to comprehend.
I had a question, Dave, about the part of the sentence that says, just like the Trinity, which might be called the diversity of perfect love with itself, which creates one. What Trinity are you speaking about? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or mind, body?
Oh yeah, no, that's
Oh,
capital T Trinity, so it's Father, Son, and Spirit.
okay.
But you're reading ahead, man. You're getting us all out of order. See, my CDO, that's alphabetical order for OCD, is screaming right now because we got to do the other sentences first, right? But
Well, the
yeah,
only thing,
that would be the Trinity of Christianity
Got it.
that he's talking about there.
The
I was
statement.
just gonna say, oh,
Good,
sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say the first reaction I had to that first sentence, Dave, was how small we are in the universe. I mean, I guess I looked at it from a more, I know that isn't what they're talking about oneness, but when you look at ourselves in the big picture of this mosaic that you talk about, it sounds like we're just this small little cog in the wheel that makes this all go around too. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I just had that initial reaction. Still a
It's
oneness, but small. We're
Yeah,
just so
yeah, and
tiny.
it's not by accident that he says a Copernican revolution, because the whole idea was, yeah, does the sun revolve around the earth? Does the earth revolve around the sun? And in this sentence, does the universe revolve around us? Does life revolve around us as the ego would have it and like us to believe? Or are we revolving with everything else around life? You know, are we in this little third-rate galaxy, somewhere two-thirds out of the way from the galactic core, one of trillions of galaxies that we can see now with our scopes? I mean, yes, you can start to feel very insignificant. But at the same time, the beauty of the way that this universe is constructed, because I love the way that Stephen Hawking says it, the universe is finite, but it has no edge. Think about what that means. It means no matter how far you go in any direction, you will never get to the edge of the universe where the stars thin out and there's nothing ahead of you and you could look back at the ball of the universe. If you go far enough in any direction, you'll end up back where you started, because it's as if we were in a gigantic black hole where everything has curved around itself. It's like an ant traveling the inside of a ping pong ball. You can go and go, but you're just going to be continually coming back to where you started. But what does that mean mathematically? It means wherever you are in the universe, it looks exactly the same. Equal density and distribution of stars wherever you are. So mathematically, anywhere you are in the universe is exactly the center of the universe, because nothing else makes any sense. And so even though we're on a third-rate galaxy, two-thirds out from the galactic core and one of trillions of galaxies, we're still in the center of the universe. And I think that's a beautiful analogy for how we can be in the center of God's universe and at the same time, just this tiny speck, of the living whole. Another paradox.
And our egos make us feel like we're the center of the universe a lot of times too. So.
That's all they do. That's all they do. And that's why it's so important for us to balance our time in and out of that egoic bubble. Otherwise, we're going to be really skewed in terms of being able to live our lives between heaven and earth. So you are an instance of a universal and even eternal pattern, and the one life, all caps, that many of us call God is living itself in you and through you and as you. So he's back to panentheism. Remember when we talked about those different worldviews, those cosmologies? So theism is God is a sentient being who stands outside of creation but interacts with it. Pantheism is as if the universe is God's body. The universe is God. Panentheism, though, is that all of this is infused by God. God is not separate from it, but he's not it itself, but he's infused and part of it. And so Richard Rohr has a panentheistic worldview. And that comes through over and over in his writings. And here is a absolute example of that. You know, the one life that many of us call God is living itself in you and through you and as you. So God is infused in us. We are made of God's stuff. You know, we're not God, but we are living God through us. So it's an interesting point of view that he brings up. But that idea of oneness kind of lends itself to that. You know, Jesus saying, I and the Father are one. I don't do anything of my own initiative. I only do what the Father tells me to do. You know, he makes himself sound subservient to God in every way, which, you know, the Trinity really was that's why there was such a debate in the 300 years leading up to the first council at Nicaea that formulated the doctrine of the Trinity, because Jesus sounds subservient to the Father. But if he's really God, then how is he subservient? You know, is he a created being or was he co-eternal? I mean, all these theological questions were raging and tearing the church apart for nearly 300 years. That's why Constantine needed to call the council and bring them together. The Arian controversy was the main issue that the council needed to decide, because he wanted Christianity to be a unifying force as he was rebuilding the empire after the Civil War. And it needed to be solved. So here we are with the Trinity, which says, no, they're exactly the same substance. They're co-equal. And of course, that satisfied nobody and didn't make any sense. It was just a mystery. But at least it was something on which they could begin to build. But here we are looking at this. How are we one with all of this and yet still subservient to it? You know, these are the questions that we need to answer for ourselves as we move forward, and have some sort of sense of a worldview and of a paradigm that allows us to move forward in life, feeling connected, feeling grateful and hopeful, and at the same time being able to accept life on life's terms. So this is a part of us creating our own personal theology that allows us to move forward in life and do exactly that. So Rohr is giving you his. You don't need to adopt his, but you need to have one. And he says this realization is an earthquake in the brain, a hurricane in the heart, a Copernican revolution in the mind, and a monumental shift in consciousness. Yet most of us do not even seem interested in it. It's too big to imagine and can only be revealed slowly. You have never been separate from God, except in your mind. So that's kind of back what you just said, Kathy. You know, it's our minds which create the sensation, the illusion of separation, but it only exists in that egoic consciousness. When Brady shuffled off his mortal coil for those moments, you know, in that crash room and was free from his egoic consciousness, all of a sudden, it was nothing but unity. It was nothing but oneness. There was no words. There was no thought. There was no rational, logical, anything. He was made to know things, but it wasn't a rational thought. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Brady, but having read your manuscript, that's what struck me about it. There was no imagery. There was no iconography. There was just this sense of complete connection, because he didn't have that frame of reference anymore dictating to him what he was supposed to see or how he was supposed to see it. Patricia has pretty much the same story, you know? And so that's what we can experience every time we actually get into that place of choiceless awareness in contemplative practice, you know? And we can practice the little death, you know? We're practicing for the big death, the big sleep, right? We're practicing for that. And reinforcing in ourselves that every time we do that, every time we step outside of our ego consciousness, it feels great. It feels connected. It feels peaceful. The anxiety is gone. And so why would we expect anything else to happen at the moment of the big sleep? And so we're slowly eroding our fear of death away the more and more that we practice contemplatively, because we're realizing that once the mind is out of the way, then that oneness of everything can come back to the fore. So this is what he's talking about, this monumental shift in consciousness, that we've never been separate from God, that one life, that ultimate reality from everything that is, except in our minds. So this has huge implications for the afterlife, if you think about it. And they're kind of unsettling in a way, in the same way that the Moken are unsettling to us, but to that woman that I was talking about. I mean, she's hearing me say all this stuff and she's shaking her head because it sounds alien, it sounds less than, it sounds wrong to not have the individual love that she has for her daughter and the loss she feels when her daughter is not present and birthdays and all of that stuff, as it does to every single one of us. But even in Jesus' day, if you go to Matthew 22 and read the interaction that he has with the Sadducees there, and I know we've talked about this before, but the Sadducees, who didn't necessarily believe in an afterlife because they only accepted the first 5 books, the Torah, which doesn't speak about an afterlife, doesn't speak about any kind of consciousness, after death. And so they didn't necessarily believe in it. And they certainly didn't believe in a resurrection the way that we do and the way that the Pharisees did. So Jesus, is much more aligned with the Pharisees in terms of their cosmology and their theology than he was with the Sadducees. And so they come to mock him and they say, hey, Mosaic law mandates that a woman whose husband dies needs to be taken in by his brother so that, into his harem, in order that otherwise she would just be out on the street and she would have no means of sustenance. So they posit where there are 7 brothers and the wife of one of the brothers dies, or the brother dies. And so the wife becomes the wife of the next brother, he dies. So she goes through all 7 brothers, they all die. And so the question to Jesus is, whose wife will she be in the Olam Haba, in the world to come? And they're just mocking him. They're just putting up this ridiculous scenario just to hopefully tie him into knots and make him look stupid. And Jesus says, man, you guys just don't get it. He says, in the Olam Haba, in the world to come, nobody is given in marriage, but men and women are like the angels in heaven. Okay, think about that for just a second, because it's one of the very, very few places where any kind of insight about the next life is given in Scripture. But what is it telling us? It's telling us that we're not going to pair off. It's telling us that we're not going to have husbands and wives and spouses and significant others, or maybe even best friends, that our sense of oneness and connection is going to be so great that everyone is a spouse, everyone is a best friend. That we're going to have that same kind of connection the way the Moken do, that we're all going to be just parts of this one organism, so connected that we won't feel the need or the lack of having our individual relationships. Now, I don't like that idea. I don't know about you, but that's kind of unsettling. Now, like Brady and Patricia would tell us, that there was no sense of lack, in their near-death experiences, but it sure feels like one right now, I'll tell you that. But if we're really part of this oneness of everything, then the implications are pretty huge,
And Dave, doesn't the Mormon culture, don't they believe in being sealed in this life, and you're sealed to that person forever and into the next life, right? Otherwise you'll be unsealed or whatever. So I don't know how it works with they get divorced. Do they get divorced in the Mormon church? I guess you can, but
Oh, sure
then
you
you're
can.
then you're unsealed. Now you enter seal with someone, or can you be resealed to someone else, or do they? I
Well,
don't
yeah,
even.
but here's the rub, see, because I spent a year in the Mormon church because I befriended a woman at my office at the time, and this is right in the center of my searching. And I was looking everywhere except Christianity at this point because I figured I already done that. And here's this woman who is so well put together, and we got into a conversation, and she told me that she was coming back with her family, her husband and 2 children, from a vacation in Utah, and he fell asleep at the wheel, and she's the only one who walked away from the accident. Entire family is killed. And she told me how the church came around her and what they did and how they helped her and brought her through. And she was so together. I said, if this is what this church produces, I got to check this out, And so I spent about a year and I went through all their steps of investigation, but I could never sign on the dotted line that the theology was too far out there. And one of the reasons that I was troubled by this is that this woman was sealed to her husband who died, right? Now, if she wants to marry again, she has to marry someone who doesn't care about getting sealed, or she has to unseal from her first husband in order to seal with a new husband, because you can only be sealed once. And in Mormon theology, if you're not sealed in marriage and done everything in your life the way a good Mormon should, then you will not be awarded your own planet to be God over the way that the God of this world is God over us. So that's their idea. The whole of Mormon theology is, as God is, man will be; as man is, God was, is the idea. So if that's coming clear to you at all. But imagine the conundrum.
Yeah.
She would be dishonoring her first dead husband if she unseals from him and keeping him from fulfilling his destiny in the afterlife if she seals with another man, or she has to find a man who doesn't care about that, still within good standing in the Mormon church. I remember I just looked at her and I said, how in the world can you believe that God would put you in such a position? How could this be? And of course, she didn't have an answer for that. And it was kind of a rhetorical question anyway. But this idea of, yeah, being sealed throughout eternity still creates problems in this life.
And is that similar to an annulment in the Catholic Church? Is annulment is sort of
Wait,
similar.
what in a Catholic church?
Annulment.
Oh, annulment.
Isn't that, it's not exactly the same where you sort of, what is an annulment? It's where you sort of,
Annulment means that
it
it's
didn't
as if the
happen,
marriage
or
never happened.
as
It
if it
never
never
existed.
existed, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because Catholics don't believe in divorce, you know.
Mm.
So
Kathy, can I answer your question about the Mormon Church?
Yeah.
You can get a temple divorce, but it is very difficult. A woman can only be sealed to one man, but a man can be sealed to more than one woman.
Oh, okay.
Figures.
Interesting.
yeah, another paternalistic perk, right? For the guys.
Off
But
of the,
Yeah, another, yeah,
off of his head.
sexist, paternalistic, yeah, call it what you want, yeah. His harem, yeah.
But it is interesting how this idea of this shift in consciousness, of this oneness of everything, you know, does have implications for the afterlife. Now, we can't know what it's going to be like. And the main thing about the afterlife, as we're coming to understand it, is whatever it is, it's going to be fine. Whatever it is, we're going to feel no lack. There's not going to be a felt need. It's going to be fine, but man, it spins your head around, And now you don't have to believe any of this. You can have your own personal theology, as long as it allows you to do those two things we talked about: accept life on life's terms and be able to live with hope and gratitude. But there are some big concepts being thrown about here, and I wanted to try to give you a sense of how big these are. I mean, he's not using hyperbole when he says it really is an earthquake and a hurricane and a Copernican revolution. It is, if you really follow these things down to their radical conclusions. He continues, you gradually recognize that the myriad forms of life in the universe are completely diverse and utterly one at the same time. Completely diverse and utterly one. This is what the Jews were trying to get across by saying that humans live between heaven and earth, and that our job is to bring heaven to earth and earth to heaven. So heaven, the place of absolute oneness and connection, right? Earth, the place of individual form and function and diversity. We're sandwiched right between all that. And our job is to merge the two, to bring the two together, to be able to have that dual sight, so we can deal with the individual form and function and diversity as it presents in daily life. Because if we can't live, we can't work, we can't survive. But at the same time, understand that all of these are aspects of this one thing that is at its core. And the Jews were absolutely staunch about understanding God as one, echad, one. And so that paradox is also at play here in all of this. So completely diverse and utterly one at the same time, just like the Trinity. So we're back to what Tony was asking about, which might be called diversity in perfect love with itself. Diversity in perfect love with itself, which creates oneness. We can't understand the Trinity the way that it's formulated in Christian doctrine, but the Eastern Cappadocian fathers had probably the best idea of it. They called it perichoresis, which was really referring to the circular dances that was prominent in Greek culture. And they're kind of the whirling dervish, kind of spinning dances. And so if you think about a motion blur, you think about these dancers spinning and spinning, and they kind of blur into one continuous movement. They're moving so fast. Then we get kind of the idea of this Trinity, which is diversity in motion so that it blurs into one thing. If you even think about atoms, we think about electrons revolving about atoms neatly like planets revolving around the sun. That's not the way it works at all. It's basically an electron cloud. You can't distinguish individual electrons, by it would just be this mash of movement. It's the same sort of thing here. It's the merging of oneness and diversity at the same time. And that's the kind of experience, hopefully, that we can have as we start to look at life and experience it more contemplatively, is that we're seeing both at the same time and seeing this dance, this circle dance, perichoresis, that is the best that we can come to trying to describe something that's indescribable.
I'm just wondering, because Brady's experience and Patricia's experience, they felt this unity and oneness during their death or near death. But they are existential people. They're existential thinkers. And so are you, Dave. And this is what you're teaching us. The contemplation in the small mini deaths. And that we will feel oneness in our afterlife. So I was just wondering, and maybe there's no answer, because how about the people who did die or near death, and they're not existential thinkers, or they're materialistic, let's say, and they're not insightful in contemplation? I wonder if any of them would have felt this as well, or would it just be, oh, I'm dead, there's nothing anymore, but they never came back to tell us, right? I'm just throwing it out there. Yeah, because I figured to the accounts that we hear are from existential thinkers. How about the other people? We don't hear their side. So that's my question.
Well, in answer to that, I would say you don't need to be an existential speaker to experience an existential encounter. When the encounter comes upon you, are you ready to accept it or not? I think that's the judgment. It's not, I don't see judgment as God's decision about us. It's our decision about God. When we come face to face with that oneness, are we going to accept it or not? Or are we going to be holding out to try to hang on to our individualism? Dante's Satan is brilliant at that. Remember what he says? He says, it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. There is the absolute expression of individuality. He's going to hang on to his individuality and his ability to control, even if it means continuing to live in hell, because he'd rather do that than serve in heaven, to lose his sense of self in the oneness. And basically, that's the egoic mind. That's what we're up against. Our egoic mind is Satan raging in hell about that. It's brilliant imagery.
It seems to me if you never see, if you don't get to the point that that you're not separate from God, and you go into the afterlife kicking and screaming, it's like you miss the point, and then what is the afterlife if you do go into it kicking and screaming?
It's interesting to read. There are books written, there's articles and research certainly in older age, when people are senior, there are very few accounts of people going into the afterlife kicking and screaming. Frequently, there's a moment of acceptance that comes previous to death. I have read a book recently about the kind of psychobabble of people who are passing, and this author has actually found meaning in what they're saying and what they're doing. People frequently report seeing those who have passed on before. There's very little kicking and screaming goes on at that point, but we all know, at least what we've seen in movies, is that younger people who are wounded or mortally wounded seem to go kicking and screaming. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you, Brady, on that. To Ellen's point, if you and Patricia had an experience where when you crossed into that phase, your whole ego just went away. So maybe that just happens to everybody where there is no ego to go kicking and screaming with. Maybe you just dissolve into this space of whatever total consuming love or whatever it is that you were describing how you felt. Maybe there is no ego. And when we talk about hell, I just think of hell as an egoic place where we place ourselves in a sense. I mean, and then maybe that all goes away when we die. There is no hell. You just go into this place of love. I think the hell sometimes comes with what we do to ourselves. It's our own hell we live in.
Oh.
I don't know. You guys are getting pretty close to universalism here. Look out. Look out.
That's why I wanted to, but Tony left the room, but Tony, come back. Salas. But that's why last night too, I mentioned I reread one of my favorite poems, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. But as an older person, yes, that's what Tony said. It's kicking and screaming towards death. And I don't want that. That I want to accept death peacefully, quietly, and surrender to it and be at peace. But that Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night used to be my favorite poems as a young person.
Well, that's
Something
why
changed.
contemplation is so important for us to be practicing, for that moment, and to learn to not fear it, to not fear this falling away of our ego consciousness, that it doesn't need to hold any fear for us. I got a chance to meet, Marion and I got a chance to meet Thomas Keating. He led a retreat at Sarah years and years ago. And we met him. He was in his wheelchair outside one of the convocations, and we got a chance to talk, and somehow we got on the subject, but I never forget what he said. He said, I have great hope that a lot of things happen in the dying process, because I don't know when they'd happen otherwise, and I think that's coming back to what Brady was saying, in those last few nanoseconds before the lights go out, or in the dying process, I think a lot of stuff happens that we're going to have to come to grips with. And maybe you spent a lifetime avoiding those issues and kicking the can down the road. But at that point, a lot of things could happen. Kind of like that Oxbow incident we were talking about a few sessions back, where this whole life is almost lived in the moment between the trap door opening and the rope snapping the neck. It's kind of like that. But obviously he had thought about that, and that's the way that he expressed it. So I think there's so much we just don't know, and we don't need to know. We're not gonna. So you can speculate all you want, but you're not going to get any closer. But in God's infinite grace and wisdom, it's going to be fair and equitable, however it works out. If we can start to trust that, then we can deal with these things a lot easier. Hey, look,
Dave,
go ahead.
No, I just loved your message on Sunday, and I've repeated this, paraphrased it with some people this week, clients, but that we don't climb into heaven, we fall into heaven. And I think the same is true with dying. We don't climb into it, we fall into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are people who resist that fall. There's a we had hospice at our house, and the hospice workers have wonderful stories, rich stories. And the hospice worker, this was from Madeline, from Beth's mom, and the hospice worker told us a story about a woman who was in hospice care and in her last days, and the daughters had been advised to go to her and say, "Mom, you can go. We love you. You've been a wonderful mother. We're going to miss you, but you're going to have a beautiful, wherever you're going is going to be beautiful." And they're just saying this, and the mom's kind of laying there. And all of a sudden, mom opens her eyes and she goes, "I'm trying. I'm trying."
That's great. Shut up and let me fall.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, let me finish these last two paragraphs so we can say we did. He says, we're all undergoing God, whose supreme job is the oneing of all reality. Oneing is a lovely word I borrow from Lady Julian of Norwich, Middle English, to describe the process of overcoming dualisms and divisions artificially created by the ego and the mind. This should be an enormous weight off your back. All you can really do is agree to joyously participate. That's kind of like falling, right? You just let yourself go. Life in the spirit will feel like being caught much more than being taught about any particular doctrine. Do you see how we're all trying to say the same thing? You're falling, you're not climbing. All you can do is just joyously participate. Thomas Merton, just join in the general dance, right? Everybody is trying to describe what it feels like when you push off and let go rather than trying to lean forward and grab and acquire. It's such a different feeling. Henceforth, your very motivation and momentum for the journey toward holiness and wholeness is simply immense gratitude for already being there. And that's the overall basic truth, is that there's nothing to acquire. We already have everything that we could possibly have from God, and we were born that way. And every moment of our life is lived that way, and we will die that way. The question is, are we ever going to realize it through our egoic minds? And we're not going to realize it through our egoic minds. We're going to realize it in spite of our egoic minds, and that's why contemplation allows us to start striking a balance between the two. Wow, that was a lot of stuff.
Hey, you're not done with this yet, are you?
Done with what?
This chapter. This is like, at least for me, this should be an enormous weight off your back, and I'll move forward. Because it says life in the spirit will feel like being caught more than being taught. And I kind of feel that way right now. I just got caught somewhere.
Well, Tony, we are done for tonight.
Yes.
But here's the thing, if there are aspects of this that, you really want to develop further, we'll pick this up next week. And so that's why I always want to give you guys time at the beginning to derail anything that we have planned for the day. Because if there's still stuff laying on, let's get into it. So, kind of think more about this, reread this section, and if there are still lingering questions, and make notes for yourself and then bring them in next session and we'll jump back on it. Because there is a lot here. And it's not like you can read something like this or we can spend an hour discussing it and you're going to have it. Oh my gosh, just getting the concept is monumental, but that's not even the beginning of the beginning, because to actually put that into practice and to start experience life from that point of view, that just takes time. And it's not that time will do it. It's your intentional willingness to practice it and step out in it will take time, but you still have to intentionally do it. And so, I think I've confessed to you, it was 10 full years for me before I felt like I started to, actually embody these concepts in a way that were starting to make a difference in my level of neuroticism. So it takes time. Now, hopefully it's not going to take you so long because we actually have a community like this that is reinforcing and talking and supporting each other. I didn't have that when I was doing this myself, but it's going to take time. And so, yeah, this is going to be literally peeling the onion layer by layer and grinding the stone smooth, but it's just going to take time. So, yeah, these concepts, as we really get into them, really do spin your head around. But as you start to experience it yourself, then, like we were saying Sunday, all the songs make sense, right? It just changes the whole nature of it. You read these incomprehensible or seemingly incomprehensible words from the mystics or from the scriptures, and suddenly it's like, that's what it is. I know that now, and it locks into place and reinforces, and it's a beautiful thing. Okay, we don't have Scott tonight to kick around. So is there anyone who would like to close us in prayer? Come on, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. Anybody? Wow.
Wow.
You all so
Wow.
shy.
All right, I'll do it.
You go, Randy. Thank you, sir.
But, gosh. Mm. Oh, thank you, Father. Oh, so much for this moment to, I don't know, just rest in the mystery. And it certainly is a mystery. But when we just kind of realize that, yeah, the simple truth that all our thinking has formed our reality in this realm, that if we could just let it drift away, even if just for a moment, we peel back what is true, what is real, that we are one with you. And there's nothing we can do. This is natural as breath, Father. So thank you for giving us breath. Thank you for the life force, the chi, the shakti, the spirit that is within us that allows us to be present in this realm and for us to be together, but most of all for us to have a consciousness level, for us to just contemplate the unity and the oneness with the universe and with each other. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you, Randy. And thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Great conversation. All right. See you Sunday.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Randy. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He's not without skills.
Done this before.
Maybe.
Good job, man. All right, everybody. See you Sunday. Bye, Jordana. See you Sunday, too.